At the very opening of hostilities within the Waco battle space, as the heavy artillery barrage from the three different artillery battalions belonging to the three major sub-units within the 68th PLA Group Army operating within the area of its 288th Light Infantry Division, including its comprising elements, its two regiments, Brigade, and Independent Headquarters and Support Battalion, as well as the 8th Independent Brigade and the 38th Light Infantry, or the 38th Infantry Brigade. Their artillery battalions were laying down enormous volumes of firepower, especially against the downtown area, wherein the 143rd Infantry Regiment, their main opponent, had lay, as they were originally tasked with destroying this particular unit, as well as various militia-type elements of armed reactionary civilians whom they knew were within the area that were banded together as a result of directly the failed border policies, which led to them essentially forming up these types of elements to even begin with, as well as other reactionary type civilian elements whom they knew would also emerge. And they had even made contingency plans for the event, which was actually happening, of certain American forces fleeing the Fort Hood area and headed in their direction, as they had units that were spaced out both adjacent to I-35 in the south of this particular battle space, as well as even a bit further to the southwest, which could move in and close in behind them, strategically trapping them within this particular battlefield. As that was what would be the plan anyway, as the Russian forces, including the 16th Tank Division and 15th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade, both comprising elements of the Russian 2nd Combined Arms Army, having to fight through different American units before physically having been able to reach the 409 Cav, the 91st Brigade Engineering Battalion, as well as the 2nd Squadron of 3rd ACR, and even some mechanized infantry companies that were conducting foot-based patrol training but had quickly mounted up in vehicles and fled the battlefield at the Fort Hood area. As the Russian 2nd Combined Arms Army had ample formations comprised of heavily armored units within its forces, those partaking in the Fort Hood battle were equipped with the very well-balanced, potent T-80U main battle tank, while those fighting in the Austin and San Antonio areas, some of the other formations within the 2nd Combined Arms Army, were equipped with the T-72B3M, which itself was an entirely different main battle tank with a new gun and new technologies incorporated within it, including its fire control system and ballistic computer, as well as it having a new engine and new armor. It was a completely different tank than the original iteration of the T-72, and had proven its worth in the Great Eastern European Proxy War, which had even racked up kills of Western-made battle tanks, including the M1 Abrams. Both tanks were relatively formidable main battle tanks, although the 15th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade and the 16th Tank Division were equipped with the T-80U, which would be sending, as of the 16th Tank Division, an armored battalion and armored infantry battalion of its comprising elements north in hot pursuit of the American forces that would arrive in the battlefield far earlier than they, as they had to fight through additional American units before they could proceed in pursuing these forces, only to arrive a few hours later and end up being utilized against the downtown area since they had moved into this particular battle space. The 68th PLA Group Army was equally a very powerful group army, although a reserve group army as part of China's massive ready reserve forces. Its formations were equipped with the Type 99A within the armored forces of its 112th Combined Arms Brigade, which was a heavy combined arms brigade, as it had been created as part of this group army had gone through the second phase of reorganization, as the 288th Light Infantry Division's components were to be basically reconfigured into light combined arms brigades, disbanding the division. The invasion had broken out before this formation could be disbanded and its comprising elements reconfigured into these two new combined arms brigades. Hence, it was still the 288th Light Division at the outbreak of the invasion. The Type 99A was potentially the most advanced main battle tank in the world, as going over the technical specifications, one can easily see how this is the case. Although not far behind it, the PLA also had the vaunted Type 96B itself, incorporating much of the same technology, armor, and other capabilities that the Type 99A possessed, although the Type 96B was lacking in a few areas, which made the Type 99 an even better tank, although the 96B was still highly capable and very powerful. With these Chinese and Russian armored forces working together in the Fort Hood area and beyond, the American formations were quickly pulverized and essentially brushed to the side, although in Waco, the local forces of these airborne infantry troops, comprising the 143rd Infantry Regiment, would put up still one hell of a fight during the course of the invasion phase, as they would last almost 2 full days. By this point in the fighting, as in the north, the fighting that had begun before even 30 minutes had elapsed, as the mechanized infantry battalion of the 3rd Light Infantry Regiment would show up to this battle a bit later against these forces. There was nearly 1,000 armed American civilians within northern Waco that had to be dealt with in this particular battle, as the battalion of the 14th Light Infantry Regiment had moved into the area first and began to surround a pocket of almost 500 of these armed reactionary civilians. The battalion moving in from the south, belonging to the 3rd Light Infantry Regiment, would arrive a bit later, by 1 a.m., as this battle would last an hour in total duration, from the time of this battalion of the 14th surrounding these forces with their light mechanized infantry forces, which were comprised of the ZBL-08 infantry fighting vehicle versions, but also the armor personnel carrier versions, with the infantry fighting vehicles being extremely powerful, as they had a Gatling 35mm autocannon, as well as a 7.62 coax machine gun, and, of course, their HJ-73C anti-tank missile mounted on a rail on the side of the vehicle's turret, with the armored personnel carrier version having in place of where the infantry fighting vehicle had its turret, a machine gun turret, which was manned by a turret gunner. These were 8-wheeled vehicles, and they were very destructive, even though they were for these light infantry elements. They equipped them. While they could call on their artillery forces from the 155mm PCL 181 truck-mounted howitzers, these forces would instead call upon their mortars due to the close proximity of I-35 in many of these particular areas. They would call instead upon their 82mm mortars fired by the mortar company within the independent headquarters battalion. As within this headquarters battalion, they comprised the entire division's fire support elements, because in lieu of fire support companies like regular, heavier mechanized infantry battalions within the PLA possessed, they instead, within these light mechanized infantry companies, had a light anti-tank company that was comprised of WZ-550 four-wheeled armored anti-tank vehicles, which had 4 HJ-09 anti-tank missile pods apiece per vehicle. These were wheeled vehicles, again, 4-wheeled, and they were armored, but they had only 4 HJ-09 anti-tank missiles, similar to the same way that the battalions of light mechanized infantry were comprised of the 3rd Light Mechanized Infantry Division that was part of the 10th PLA Group Army at the Laredo Battle. As these forces moved into the area, they had moved into this 2-mile east to west by 1.5-mile north-south area. This segment of the highway right here was essentially part of the 340/6 route, which was a ring road of sorts, which was a semicircle ring road around Waco, which then tapered off from a highway segment of divided 4-lane highway, 2 lanes each side, into a wide boulevard that went all the way towards the Waco Regional Airport, which turned into China Springs Road, which was ironic given the current situation being faced in this particular battle. As the forces on this map were comprised of both elements from the 3rd Light Infantry Regiment with its committed battalion present, as well as elements from the 14th Light Infantry Regiment and its committed battalion present. As this battalion had 3 companies in this area which were surrounding this last pocket and compressing it of these armed reactionary American civilians in the north, as depicted on this map. And the forces in the southern part of this map were of the other battalion of light mechanized infantry that had been committed by the 3rd Light Infantry Regiment. And this consisted of 2 companies. The other company of the 14th Light Infantry Regiment is moving beneath this bridge right here, down this street that's parallel to the access road beside I-35. As clearing all enemy forces adjacent to the highway was absolutely necessary and was of the highest priority for the PLA, they regarded not whether it was a group of armed civilians or whether it was professional military forces or even if it was paramilitary alphabet forces. To them, this didn't matter. They needed to clear any possibility of any of their lighter vehicles being destroyed while within convoying operations moving up the highway. As again, these group armies of the external invasion prong, the group armies 7 through 13 of that prong moving up I-35, this would be literally dozens and dozens of miles long of a procession of these group armies. And although there were enormously powerful combat formations that could more than adequately defend themselves moving up the highway, even in a straight line, with staggered weapons, the lighter vehicles within these convoys that belong to support units or even the signals or electronic warfare assets or administrative vehicles or more could be destroyed or heavily damaged, which could hold up progress for hours, and that could absolutely be not tolerated by the PLA invasion forces or even that of their allies, as there was an invasion prong that contained a Russian combined arms army. As these forces were moving up in a convoying formation, they were not broadly spread out in a combat-like formation and were in a straight line, moving in a straight line. And if one vehicle got damaged, it could hold up progress, and again, that was not tolerated. As on this particular map, this particular company from the 3rd Light Infantry Regiment's committed battalion operating in the area, as it was comprised of the 6 mechanized infantry companies of light mechanized infantry forces, as well as the light anti-tank company comprised of the WZ-550 anti-tank vehicles and its headquarters company. There were 2 companies pictured from the battalion of the 3rd Light Infantry Regiment. This is the headquarters elements of this company. This was the entire company of the vehicles. And this company, the combat platoons of this company, had dropped off their light mechanized infantry dismounted squads to clear the buildings in this particular area thoroughly and methodically to provide a flank clearance operation for their now empty vehicles devoid of their squads, with only their drivers and gunners essentially and their higher up NCOs and officers, to move forward without having to worry about enemy personnel attacking them. And because these vehicles had now emptied out their combat troops, the other company that was operating in the area had moved in and fanned out and was beginning to provide cover for these vehicles both to the north and to the south as they were moving ahead. While that was going on, this company was moving in to assist in the surrounding of this pocket, which had already been now, at the opening of this very map, compressed into a small area. As at the very opening of this map, these vehicles had just been molotoved by these personnel on the roof before these personnel had gotten KIA'd by these incoming loitering munitions, one for each side of the roof, whereas these other ones were impacting different personnel that were trying to flee across this segment of highway or through holes in this wall of this sound barrier wall that had been erected separating the backyards of these homes right here from the highway to muffle out the noise. The mortar strikes from the 82 millimeter mortars, also the loitering munition strikes, had badly damaged or in some cases even blasted holes in the walls, where there had been a few personnel that tried to run through these holes only to be mortared and KIA'd, as these mortar strikes would continue right here as a sort of terrain denial to keep these enemy personnel channeled into a kill zone right here, where they would be heavily mortared and now struck by missiles from an incoming Wing Loon 2 drone at the opening of this map that had, before it entered this particular battle space right here, had already fired HJ-10 anti-tank missiles, which were a menace to armored vehicles and bunkers and even buildings, which two of which landed in this group right here, along with mortar strikes from 82 millimeter mortars, while two others slammed into the side of this building, as by that time the loitering munitions hit this group of 5 enemy personnel on this roof that had thrown the molotovs over the edge of the roof down on these vehicles, along with this group of enemy personnel on this roof right here, also impacted by the other loitering munitions strike. As that was occurring, additional loitering munitions crashed into these armed reactionary civilians here and here, as well as here, and even one for this group right here that was hiding amid these trees. Everything was ISR and AI directed, as always, and anything that could be seen could be destroyed. As this battle had proceeded, early on, this company right here surrounding this particular portion of the cordon had already diligently moved through this area. This hotel had already been destroyed right here. It had been leveled by mortar strikes, anti-tank missile strikes, and 35 millimeter autocannon fire, which had completely gutted and shredded this building to complete utter ruination as these forces had moved through. These squads in the double column rolling shield had already peeled off and cleared the buildings on either side, minus this rubble, as they rolled through the area. And by the time they got here, they were preparing to clear this large hotel right here. As these forces in these two rolling T formations were taking some fire from the windows, they were firing up at the enemies along with heavy fire support from this infantry fighting vehicle, their ZBL-08 IFV, firing its powerful autocannon up at these forces, 35 millimeter HE armor-piercing ammunition, which shredded into and completely gutted parts of this building. As this vehicle moved forward here, it was firing its heavy machine gun until these forces breached and made entry, and then it laid off the machine gun, with these forces moving parallel to it to guard the outside of the building, along with this group moving forward again, as these two squads were busy clearing out this building. And as they made it to the corners, they fired on any survivors that fled this building that hadn't already been KIA'd by the enormous barrage of mortars, loitering munitions, and even a few missiles that came in and impacted this particular area from the combat drone, the Wing-Loom 2. As these squads had finished clearing buildings, they were running into this area as other squads had cleared other buildings. And they were now taking a little bit of fire at the opening of the map, but they had returned such heavy fire that they completely annihilated these civilians. All they had was small arms. They could do very little, if anything, to their vehicles at all, other than maybe scratch the paint. And these vehicles had heavy machine guns, their W85 12.7 millimeter, and they also had their infantry fighting vehicles that had the very, very powerful 35 millimeter Gatling autocannon. So these forces were wiped out quick. As these squads moved in and held position here, they had fired into these buildings, and receiving no return fire, they advanced. One went in to clear this house while the other stayed outside in the backyard of this area. As early on, when these vehicles had taken fire, they had a dismounted squad in a double column rolling shield to guard the rear flank areas of these vehicles, but also for the half squad in the closest to the vehicle to watch the front, firing around the corners. This was to assist the turret gunners in preventing any offhand molotov type attacks, as if there was any type of mass kamikaze attack, they could help in cutting down those trying to perpetrate such a thing. But that didn't happen. As these couple survivors tried to flee, as these groups here were getting cut down, and they were also taking some fire as they fled, they were cut down by these forces right here watching this area. As this squad had peeled around, taken some fire, returned fire, along with heavy machine gun fire from this vehicle right here. All at the same time, all this was happening as these squads are moving into this building and these vehicles are beginning to move up. This heavy machine gun fire was shredding through these buildings while this squad peeled around and laid down fire and then bounded. No return fire. They bounded again and held their position right here to watch and guard this block. As this group was trying to cross the street, they were cut down, along with mortar strikes landing right here, even within this grassy area with trees that was in the middle of these intersecting streets. This group was cut down along with these personnel from the mortar strikes and also the heavy incoming volumes of fire from two different sides, like an L shape. So by the time this all had occurred, at the same time, these personnel were trying to cross from this little city block with 3 homes in their backyards. They're all being in their back and side yards. They were trying to cross to these properties right here, but they were all cut down in the fire coming from down the street. They were all cut down. Everything, again, ISR and AI directed. These buildings were already destroyed up here and being run over by these vehicles at the time of them surrounding this pocket of armed reactionary civilians, with the mortar strikes, loitering munition strikes, even missile strikes coming in, completely and totally obliterating these forces. Keep in mind, this is a relatively large area with a lot of different activities happening. There were activities down here occurring at the same time as these activities up here, and it's difficult to convey them all in any rational order, although it'll be attempted as always. As these forces were crossing this bridge right here, they were firing down at these forces as they were trying to cross this embattled area as mortars came in and began to cut all of these personnel down with the missile strikes as well, and some of the loitering munition strikes that impacted in this area too, with these mortars acting not only to wipe out any of these personnel, but also as a terrain denial area strike to prevent them from fleeing. As they were being increasingly cut off at this point in time as these forces had moved here. They could watch this way and watch across the street to also assist in these terrain denial strikes with preventing any personnel from fleeing. As that was happening, these forces were completely peppering the top floors and even the bottom floors of these buildings right here with heavy volumes of 12.7 millimeter machine gun fire, even 35 millimeter autocannon fire, and missiles impacted this building as well. The HJ-10 blasting hunks of concrete and building materials out of the sides of these buildings as they hit ISR-directed targets, as the quadcopter recon drones that each and every vehicle and squad possessed could see personnel in these windows and they could vector fire at them. As that was happening, and this Wing Loom 2 drone had left the area after firing their missiles at the opening of the map, these forces already had moved around these burning vehicles, and there had been some KIAs as some of the burning crew members got out of the vehicles, had been pelted by molotovs. A few of them got hit by personnel firing from out the windows on these sides of the buildings, although they were completely wiped out by the return fire. They did get a few KIAs off of these squads that had tried to flee to other nearby vehicles as they were passing around the burning vehicles to move into this area. And these vehicles had cut these personnel down with the help of loitering munition strikes. As the 3 remaining squads from the 3 remaining vehicles of the lead platoon had dismounted while the vehicles were moving around here to cut off completely this pocket as they could vector fire this way, the 3 squads were clearing these apartment buildings. These were 5-floor buildings. On the top of the 5th floor, where a 6th floor would have been if there was a 6th floor, the roof of the building had these personnel that were already eliminated by these loitering munition strikes. So on the 5th floor, it would have still been hard for some of these vehicles passing through to reach that high of an angle from their turrets, but vehicles further back could reach this side of the building and this side, but the vehicles passing between these buildings had a hard time with that, but the loitering munition strikes took care of the enemies on the rooftops while they proceeded. And although they lost 2 vehicles, they lost 2 of their armor personnel carrier versions of their ZBL-08s, and they lost some crew members out of those vehicles that bailed out, that were on fire, trying to roll around on the street, put out fires, or get into the safety of the other passing vehicles that would pick them up. They had wiped out some of these crews and the squads that were within these vehicles. So there were some KIAs and WIAs from that. And moving through this area, though the vehicles were taking fire from these forces early on in the opening of this battle, while these vehicles moved in this area and wiped these guys out with the assistance of the loitering munitions hitting these personnel as well, they had already dropped their squads off. They were fighting in every hallway, room, everything over this apartment building. Every apartment, every hall had to be cleared on every floor, and they were busy clearing this building before they were proceeding to move to the next building and clear it, as by now they were totally surrounded as these forces had moved around from this particular company, with the other company already being able to still hold down this area on the side of the bridge as they could vector their turret this way and fire this way. So this company entering the picture here had stopped here to allow the squads from this other company that belonged to a whole different battalion from the 3rd Light Infantry Regiment, as it had dismounted all their squads of each platoon, to clear these buildings adjacent to this access road. By the time they were moving through this area here, this squad had moved up here as this squad moved to clear this building. Then they moved around to the side of the building to guard the outside of the building while this squad was clearing it. Then this squad bounded here while they held position to give them overwatch. And when they were clearing this building, they moved ahead parallel to them. They always keeping a radio contact, including with combat data links, to see where the others were so they could coordinate their movements and conduct them accordingly. With this squad going on the rooftop to provide overwatch, as these vehicles had already been attacked by then, so they were providing overwatch and firing into these buildings if anybody even so much as dared to appear in the window, in conjunction with the vehicles that had by now moved up a bit further to fully surround this area. With this squad staying and holding its position here, firing up as well into these buildings. As this happened, as these squads had moved in, these vehicles continued to their position here to aid in this action taking place against these buildings, which were now in the process of being captured. As it would take a little time to go through all three of these buildings, they had to hold their position outside of it. So as this squad moved around here, this squad went on the rooftop after clearing this building, this rolling T formation. This other rolling T formation went into to clear this building, while this rolling T formation went in to clear this one, with them then emerging and holding position in this parking lot / alleyway right here while they cleared these buildings. With this other rolling T moving down the street, the reason they were in a rolling T was so they could watch the upper floors of the buildings. And they held their position here at the end of the street while these actions were going on. While this one coordinated their actions with the rolling T, this wedge formation, they bounded and covered with them tactically until this wedge got to this corner and held their position before then going in and clearing this building, while this one was clearing this building, and then went out this way as this one coordinated their actions with them. And as they cleared these two houses, this one cleared these two buildings, both emerged at the same time and greased these two groups of armed reactionary civilians hiding in these backyards. They were already seen by the ISR quadcopter assets long before these squads got into position here. They knew they were back here hiding in these yards, so they just simply threw some hand grenades over the fences and then popped up over the fences and fired down into them. They wiped these guys out quick. Before this squad that had moved through these homes and broke into two half-squad stack teams cleared these two houses at the same time, while this squad then held this corner to provide overwatch before they then formed into one squad again and cleared this building. This squad moving here and then moving here. With this group of vehicles from this other different company that it was now here, and here, doing a flank clearance maneuver, since they had to provide a level of infantry support for these vehicles that had dismounted all their squads to move through the parallel areas. They had to provide a type of clearance support themselves for these vehicles that now had no infantry to dismount by the time they were to advance even further. So they were busy helping these dismounted squads of theirs clear these areas out, with them already having gotten into a firefight with these personnel here, and they had wiped them all out by the time these squads had moved into place. Hence, there being no green on these arrows. So this group, this whole platoon right here had moved here. They had stopped, letting them, who also stopped here, move ahead, while they had moved and quickly dismounted their squads, who handled these personnel right here as these clearance actions were happening over here where they had gotten into combat with them. And then they had dismounted 3 squads on this side, the other 2 on this side, that handled this action here, while the others were busy handling this action over here, while these vehicles now moved to support the infantry that had come from this platoon, while the vehicles of this platoon were firing into the upper floors of this building, taking a little bit of return fire along with this squad that was providing them infantry support to their vehicles here, while the other 2 had taken this side of the street and fought off these guys, while these vehicles now move forward parallel to this squad right here, and this squad going behind these buildings here after eradicating these personnel in the backyards, having fired all their small arms, rocket-propelled grenade ammunition, both their anti-tank and their anti-personnel. Both were very destructive, but the anti-tank was very good against buildings and bunkers, light bunkers, and lighter armored vehicles. And the anti-personnel just created more shrapnel. And the anti-personnel Type 69 rocket-propelled grenade ammunition was very good in tearing these personnel into pieces, along with 35mm tube-fired grenades from beneath the rifle barrels, also light machine gun ammunition and more. They just shredded these guys up, along with this squad here, who then advanced parallel to their advance, coordinating it all together by radio to clear out this block while these vehicles moved ahead. And were there to provide mutual support with the infantry, as always. They both supported each other, but in different ways. This squad then had moved up here and was engaging these personnel, causing the rest to flee, while then this group of vehicles, this whole company's combat vehicles who had dismounted their squads, was now crossing the street after this squad had moved up from this other platoon, from the same company that this platoon and this platoon were a part of, who were busy clearing the flanks for these vehicles of this company to move through. As they did the same thing with these personnel here, these vehicles laid heavy fire down in this particular area, along with loitering munition strikes, mortar strikes called in, which landed directly on this house and this house here, and even between the house and the apartment leasing office for these apartments, that completely cut these personnel down, along with the fire that came from over here. As again, many of these actions were going on at the same time. All of the stuff over here was happening at the same time as all of this. So some of the actions were interlinked, with the fire coming from over here at the opening of the map, with the vehicles moving through this area who later arrived here, with them already being KIA'd by this point, with them fleeing this area, being cut down by them, which by this point they had moved up a little further, with the mortars landing, blasting these areas, and these personnel trying to cross the street here who were already taking fire as they crossed, because a lot of the fire that came from these vehicles shredded right through these homes, just like this mortar strike in this middle of the street blasted huge hunks out of these homes and left very little standing left, as well as this 82 millimeter mortar strike right here that KIA'd these personnel at the opening of the map that were running up this street, along with the loitering munition strike. There was very little left of many of these homes, and you ended up getting a scene that looked very much like this, with the shrapnel of many buildings, the structures of many buildings reduced to rubble from all of the shrapnel, from the explosions, all the different munition types used, and more, and the blasts themselves, the blast pressure just blowing many of the houses apart into nothing but scrap wood and bricks and stone and concrete. That's all there was. As it started very surgical, but got very ugly very quick, as these forces, them putting up their resistance, caused these buildings to take very high levels of return fire, which completely obliterated whole sections of these neighborhoods of homes and buildings. As this platoon down here moved into this area but stopped and held their position here while they shredded up this block right here with their infantry fighting vehicle and their machine gun turrets on the APCs, pouring heavy volumes of fire into these buildings and buildings on the other side of the street just off the map. Other companies of the battalion from the 3rd Light Infantry Regiment, of which this company and this company were a part, were off-map to the south, including the anti-tank company and headquarters company and the other 4 mechanized infantry companies of light mechanized infantry, with these 2 up here, as this part of the map with this battalion only showed 2 of its companies fighting in this area, whereas their other companies were fighting the rest of these nearly 500 armed civilians here. So this is the point where the pocket comes up like this on that map, as these forces begin moving in to encapsulate it in a somewhat semicircle before finally destroying all these personnel, because by the time this map segment ends, a segment of a much larger battle, as there's even more going on to the south and more in other areas, the last surviving forces of the pocket that was 500 with more off map were being eliminated by precision ISR guided mortar strikes, even a few precision artillery strikes later, and many of the volleys of loitering munitions that were being used off map to the south against the rest of the pocket of nearly 500. This wasn't even fully half of that other pocket that was developing right here, but it didn't even become a full surrounded pocket by the time it ended, because a few artillery strikes later came in, as well as more mortar strikes, even off map in the southern part, where the rest of this battalion even was, the other 6 of 8 companies with only 2 up here. And then there were the 3 companies that were up here from this battalion, with its other 5 companies just off the map, as the other 5 were cleaning up behind the advance of the leading 3. So essentially, right here, you have this platoon move up and wipe these personnel out here as the squads get out to provide mutual support with their armored vehicles. And they fire in an L vector shape as they're firing this way, over and through this fence that separates the street from the yards. And they're firing through the buildings this way with everything they've got. Their infantry fighting vehicle of this platoon is in the street right here, since it's the strongest vehicle. And it's firing at these personnel crossing the street with a loitering munition and mortar strikes. This house, and this house completely shredded up from this mortar hit, like right in front of them in the street. And these buildings are horribly blasted here. This building took a direct mortar hit on top of it because it had armed reactionary civilians inside of it, so they dropped a mortar right on the building, just like what happened with this house right here, which are completely destroyed too. And the forces of this squad that moved up here were firing over the fence, causing them to flee into very well vectored fire from the lead vehicles of this company of vehicles moving through, although their rest of their company elements of their dismounted squads were advancing through and clearing all these businesses, including these 2 hotels right here, including these small businesses right here, with them stopping on the roof here, in the parking lot here, parking lot / alley right here, in the middle of the street here. And after clearing this building, they came up on the roof access and held position here to provide overwatch, just in case enemies tried to flee when the squads went in to clear these buildings next. Clear this one and then this one. They were doing them in order. This one first, then this one. Then the 3 squads would go in and clear out this last apartment building while it was surrounded by all of these forces having moved into position, including those on the street from the rest of this company wrapping around after their vehicles sat burning in the middle of the street. The 2 armored personnel carriers that got molotoved at the very opening of the map, as the forces on the roof weren't able to be KIA'd at that point, but they would be. But they weren't ready to be KIA'd just yet, as these loitering munitions were en route to get them. But they didn't reach them by the time they molotoved these vehicles. These vehicles took a risk, but they had to surround these buildings to clear them, and these personnel hadn't yet made it to the roof access to watch the buildings yet, but they got in a good lick while they had a chance. I mean, it's war. I mean, things like that are going to happen every now and then. Even with a force that has total ISR dominance, total technology dominance like the PLA, they're still going to take losses. As this squad went in and cleared these buildings again, and these 2 half squads cleared these, and this one moved in the alley, and they moved here by the time these were wiped out, as mentioned earlier, this squad had moved and cleared these buildings and ended up here, whereas this squad had moved through, cleared this building, then this one, and then took position outside of right here. This is a fenced-in backyard here, and these are backyards with fences dividing them right here. These don't have a dividing fence, but they're fenced off from a small business with personnel on the roof providing overwatch here, and their other squad members can even watch out this way and fire down into these areas here. But by the time they would even need to do that, this was already over, as these squads had moved here. So as these vehicles had moved into position here, they held their position right here because the forces here hadn't advanced any further. They were just holding their position to clear these areas, and these vehicles were going to wait for their personnel to move through these areas and finish their job clearing these areas. As that had happened up here, their other squads from their other 3rd platoon were down here. They had already cleared this gas station, allowing for their headquarters platoon to set up here for the other company, this platoon, and this platoon that moved up here. So this platoon, the 3rd platoon from this group of 15 vehicles, was moving through this area. They held their position outside on the outer flanks, while this squad went in and cleared this side of this strip mall and then went in and cleared this side of it, while this squad held the outside of the city block on this side. Well, this squad went in and cleared this building. This squad had peeled off into 2 half squads, already cleared these 2 before it went in here. This is happening at the same time as all these movements are at the beginning. These are the first movements of these squads. This squad cleared this building, this squad cleared this building, then they cleared this and this one at the same time, while this squad held the outside of this area on this side of the street, which could provide overwatch for these troops too, while these vehicles were moving through this area here, stopping momentarily while these squads went and cleared these. At the same time, they were stopped as this platoon went up here to hold the flanks for them to continue moving. So all of this was well choreographed, in other words. There were so many different things that were all well coordinated together. And as these squads cleared these buildings at the same time these clearances were going on over here, they cleared these blocks at the same exact time, up and down this area, before, as they were moving across, they began to move across. This squad, they cleared these 2 homes and already cleared these 2 after peeling off on 2 sides, and 2 half squads before clearing these and then crossing and clearing these. This squad cleared these and these on the very end. They held their positions in this home and this home while this squad, this platoon went up here and then went up and cleared these areas before they, that were now there, proceeded further. As again, so many things are happening all at once, it's difficult to show them in order, as all the stuff up here was happening at the same exact time as all of this here, with all of this action occurring at the same time as even all this was occurring, and even as this movement was occurring and they were being wiped out at the very opening of the map, mortar strikes wiping these personnel out at the very opening of the map, destroying these homes here, and these personnel being KIA'd by this platoon moving up and vectoring humongous volumes of 35 millimeter firepower, HJ-08 man-portable anti-tank firepower from the dismounted squads firing that way, from the HJ-73C anti-tank missile fired into these buildings, the 35 millimeter HE armor-piercing rounds. I mean, it was hellishly destructive. Mortar strikes up here. I mean, it was devastating. This mortar wiped these personnel out through this chain link fence right here. I mean, badly destroyed these homes. I mean, it was hellish. With all of that going on at the same time as all these opening movements were happening, with follow-up movements as these 2 squads had cleared this strip mall, and this squad held, this one squad clearing the strip mall, while this squad and this squad held the outer corners of the outside of it to provide overwatch as they cleared the inside of the building, before they then cleared this building, and then they advanced after they went in that building to provide overwatch on these corners as they bounded into the building so they could watch the building and around it tactically while they went in and cleared it. And then they went across the streets parallel to the building to provide overwatch again on both sides, at the building and out away from it, while they bounded into this building from this building. So they were protected on 2 sides by the other squads while they went in and cleared this building. These were apartments. They went through this, cleared this. They held their position inside here while the 2 squads on the outside held their positions to watch this area here while this platoon had gone up here and was already conducting this action after these vehicles stopped and waited for them to move up and dismount their squads and take care of the enemies right here for them while they moved up here. So they had already moved here and fanned out, and this platoon was already moving up here. So they had stopped and held their positions in and around this building, just as these squads held their positions here to watch the flanks behind this platoon here. So it's all very well coordinated and choreographed, with all of these actions occurring at or near the same exact time. As all of this took an hour from before this map opens up to when this map ends. The map opens up by 1 a.m. or just over 30 minutes into the fighting, as this began just before 12:30, approximately 25 minutes after 12, after the invasion initiated, when the forces in the north began to go after and surround this pocket first before condensing in on it to where it is now, before surrounding it and cutting it off and beginning to clear these buildings, with the last actions against this pocket being the clearance of this building, or what was left of it after it got slammed by HJ-10 anti-tank missiles fired from the Wing Loom 2 at the very opening of the map, as well as being fired at by 35 millimeter autocannon HE armor-piercing ammunition, 12.7 millimeter machine gun fire, man-portable anti-tank missiles, and rocket-propelled grenades in the form of the Type 69 Chinese RPGs. And, of course, these vehicles firing into this building here while this one was being cleared. Then they held their fire after these squads went in this building. Then this building was being fired at, and then these squads were firing off the roof on this side with vehicles firing on this side. Then they held their fire as the squads went in to clear this remains of this last building. This building had been hit the hardest, of course. HJ-10 missiles, the loitering munitions on the roof, the vehicle-based fire, personnel-based fire from this roof and street-based vehicle fire. I mean, it was enormous. And this movement here was the last movement of this segment of the map. After this map segment of the larger battle, as there was more going on in the south, ended, the last survivors in this area had been wiped out by a few well-placed artillery shots, with the quadcopter recon assets beaming in precise coordinates to strike the remaining survivors, as well as mortar strikes, more loitering munition strikes, with these forces eventually moving in to clear the last areas that were known to have enemy personnel at the outset of hostilities. Leading up to that, these city blocks right here were all but liquidated by that time. I mean, there wasn't very much left, with loitering munitions, mortars hitting behind the lines of contact on these city blocks, with the heavy volumes of fire shredding through these city blocks right here and beyond, as again, this is only a segment of the larger fighting. There was even more going on to the south with the entire rest of this battalion. This was only a small part of one of the battalions. This is a small part of the battalion from the 3rd Light Infantry Regiment that was committed to this area right here, committed to the northern portion of the fighting against this group right here, with the rest of the battalion down here. They were comprising this northernmost element, with only 3 companies from this battalion, as it had 5 other companies mopping up behind it, as it had condensed those forces into an even smaller area at the time of this map as it opened up. So the area was an oval like this. They had closed the loop, with them being able to vector fire to cut off any enemy personnel trying to flee this surrounded area, as the rest of their forces had moved up this way, over this bridge, and around to cut them off, with these vehicles now being able to hold this area down behind the company that moved in. And the other company moving in here didn't have to do a whole lot other than watch these buildings, in addition to the rest of this company, minus 2 of their platoon's vehicles that got destroyed, which had moved around here, with them still being relatively spaced out. But they had to patch up the room that their 2 other vehicles would have filled up. But still, it was easily done by the follow-up company now having cleared out these areas and moving in. So all that was really left were these buildings for this pocket up here, as they had wiped out early on all of these personnel that had fled out of this area as it had been cleared, and these two companies moved in and surrounded them. In the same way that this area down here had been thoroughly cleared by all these dismounts, along with their vehicles assisting them. Same thing was going on to the exact south of this particular area, with the other companies of the mechanized infantry forces doing the exact same thing that this company had done, dismounting their troops and going through buildings or completely destroying them. If they didn't outright go through them and clear them, they completely just destroyed them, like was the case in this particular area right here. All these homes ended up looking a lot like on this particular illustration. They were all nothing but rubble, as 35 millimeter ammunition would completely shred and blast houses into nothing but scrap. And same with the 82 millimeter mortars. And even if a loitering munition with a fragmentation warhead would directly hit a house, I mean, it would pretty much do the same thing to the house too that these mortars would do. And that 35 millimeter ammunition, it was all very destructive. Even against the larger, more sturdier buildings like these 5-floor apartment buildings. I mean, them getting hit by all that ammunition was hellishly devastating upon them too. But essentially, the PLA had successfully captured the area adjacent to I-35 within northern Waco, and now a ring was beginning to form around the embattled 143rd as the armored battalions moved in to this area after clearing this part of I-35, and would soon be joined by forces from the 38th Infantry Brigade, beginning to first engage arriving American forces as well as armed civilians in the south, before then moving up to take their position in surrounding the 143rd, who had no idea where enemies were and what was going on, apart from knowing that the enemies were coming from outside of the immediate downtown area where they happened to be at. In the next battle, the combat at the capture and holding of the Waco Regional Airport will be explored within this hypothetical invasion documentary series on fourth-generation warfare featuring the Waco battle.